Okay, we'll go ahead and get started this afternoon. Again, my name is Dave Shiley. I'm the Extension Educator in Local Food Systems and Small Farms in Unit 19, which includes Coles, Cumberland, Douglas, Moultrie, and Shelby counties. And this afternoon we're going to talk about forest management and focusing on planning. You know, what can you do? What should you be doing to best utilize your forest land resources? And as we go through, if you have a question, we'll try to address those as you go. We'll have time and at the end also to address questions that you may have relative to the presentation this afternoon. So let's go ahead and get started by kind of taking a little bit closer look at your forest. So we're all kind of on the same page. Obviously we know that a forest ecosystem has these large woody plants out there dominated by trees, but there are more than trees there, right? We've got a variety of other plants. A forest also includes those animals, bacteria, fungi, all those living organisms interacting with each other, influencing each other, along with all those abiotic or non-living components in the system, the water, soil, air, rocks, and minerals, and making up that forest ecosystem. Forests are influenced by a number of things. There's kind of trees that can grow in a particular portion or location in Illinois and anywhere in the world is based on a number of things. Climate being the the main factor that influences where particular species can grow and is going to influence therefore the forest composition. You know, what is it made up of? What species of trees? And then structure just kind of refers to the growth rate and how many of those trees are, if we have a lot of just mature trees, solid timber sized trees which are over 10 inches in diameter or reproductive size, but climate is the main factor that influences where that particular community can grow and exist, but also soil, as the type of soil is going to have an influence, as well as topography. So those are the three main factors that are going to affect the composition and structure of a forest. Kind of look at the forest a little bit further, and ecologists and botanists then take a look at how can we take a look at something a little bit smaller. In the United States, this part of Illinois and eastward, you might hear someone talking about the eastern deciduous forest. So that's a pretty big area. So we're looking at how can we look at smaller parcels to begin even having some uniformity, and when we get ready to manage that particular forest. And so often hear the term ecoregion being used, and ecoregions have been named by the dominant tree species in these communities. So there's some examples there on that slide. You probably have all heard about and familiar with, oak hickory forest. But there are lots of other ecoregions or communities that have dominant species making up something other than oak and hickory. And there's several examples there. Going down to southern Illinois in a very wet soil environment, we see cypress and tupelo. In the northern part of the state, we might see experience of white pine, northern hardwoods ecoregion or community. Excuse me. And of course, floodplain and wetland ecoregions or forest communities are located across the state, and so you kind of begin to see that there's a little bit of that soil as well as topography topography and climate influencing the type. Now, just keep in mind that it's because it's an oak hickory forest. It doesn't mean that there aren't other species in that forest community. It's not just all oak and hickory. There are lots of other associated species, but oak and hickory are the dominant species. And in fact, just from a terminology standpoint, just keep in mind that if someone would talk about a pure stand of a particular species, let's say pure stand of white oak, then that means that it only has to have 75% of the trees in that particular stand of timber to be considered as a pure stand. There are, again, lots of other species that are associated with a pure stand of timber. And this slide is kind of taking a look at one of those ecoregions, and you can tell with that kind of that flat topography and the water, standing water. This is a floodplain community or ecoregion. And in this, if we kind of looked at the forest species or tree species in this community, would see silver maple, cottonwood, maybe some willow as we got closer to the water course or river or stream, as well as a variety of other species. Basswood, there might be some northern red oak on the edge of that. There are species that you usually see associated with fairly wet soils. Kind of go on up the hill and we begin to see more of an upland site. An upland site just means that, of course, the soils are more well drained. In this case, right in the center of that picture, you see a white oak. White oak, there's another one off on the right side of that picture. You see by that very light-colored bark that kind of stands out in a forest stand. Much more well drained, and these two locations are actually side by side. The previous slide, that floodplain example, is right at the bottom of this slope of this upland site. So two areas within a forest that have much different characteristics, much different growing conditions for these woody plants we call trees, and therefore the management practices we're going to apply to this site you're looking at and the previous site as a forester is going to recommend. You can't really make a blanket recommendation. So typically when we begin to write a forest management plan or manage the trees, the forest within on your property, then they're going to look at groups of trees or sub-parcels within your forest, and they're going to refer to those as stands of timber. A stand of timber is made up of trees that and soil type and exposure to the sun, etc., that have similar characteristics, so that we now can apply a management practice that's going to make sense for that smaller parcel within the forest. So your management plan is going to be subdivided. Another factor that it's going to affect tree growth and species composition too is something that's referred to as aspect. And aspect is just basically the way in which, the direction in which that slope, when we have an area, when we're part of the state that has some hilly topography, that slope is facing either southwest or northeast. So we kind of take a compass, we divide it in half, and those slopes that are facing the southwest, you can see the sun rays are more at a direct angle hitting that slope, and therefore the site conditions within that slope are much hotter and drier. Direct sun, a lot of evapotranspiration and evaporation of the water after rain, and much different growing conditions than on just across the ravine on the northeast facing slope. A northeast facing slope is going to have much better growing conditions for trees, and that's why those trees are drawn in this picture larger and bigger than across. Even if they were the same age, those trees are just going to have more favorable growing conditions. So just like when we are looking at the best soil conditions in terms of land suitability classifications for crop production, we're going to have those same forest land capability classes, and so aspect is going to have a big factor on that particular slope. So if you were subdividing a forest into with your siblings as an example, you'd want to take the northeast slope and give your sibling the southwest slope, because that northeast slope is going to be much better for growing trees. It's going to take a look at a southwest facing slope on the left side there. You see that floodplain on the right, and the southwest facing slope. Although it will grow trees, the trees are going to grow a little bit slower. And when we have a dry summer, like we had in a big part of Illinois last year, then the tree growth is going to be much reduced with that on that southwest facing slope. Again, it's hotter, drier, and also different species are going to be supported in that kind of a on that slope than on the northeast slope. And southern half of Illinois, American Beach, as an example, is seldom going to be found on that southwest facing slope. It's just too hot and dry. It's going to be over on the northeast facing slope and probably in a little cove or sub drainage on that northeast facing slope, because they kind of like the protection of that cove area of a little bit moister soil, but not wet soil. So, my question to you is, what do you have in your forest? Have you been out in the forest at all times of the year, throughout the year? And have you inventoried? Do you have any record of what you've got there growing in terms of trees? And you might be thinking or wanting to tell me that, well, I have no idea. From one tree to another, I could recognize a few. So that's why it's important in this whole planning process to involve a professional forester, either a private consulting forester that you're going to hire, or utilizing the expertise of an Illinois Department of Natural Resources district forester. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. Let's stop and just so you kind of understand, when you get this management plan, or you're talking to that private consulting forester, and he or she might be making some recommendations that you kind of question. What are we doing here? Let's talk about succession for a minute, because succession, one of the things we're doing when we're managing a resource is we're likely going to be managing succession, either trying to speed it up or slow it down. And so succession is simply defined as the replacement of one plant community by another. In a forest, we're looking at tree species, obviously. So those first trees are going to grow in an area. So if we looked at that are sometimes referred to as pioneer species, and those trees are the ones that, if you have a prairie on your property, those are the ones you're trying to get rid of all the time. You're using controlled burning, prescribed burning, or perhaps herbicide to remove those pioneer species that keep trying to encroach into your grassland ecosystem. These early successional trees are usually ones that require full sun to grow. We refer to them as intolerant species. And species composition in that early successional forest is very much dependent on what kind of trees are growing around it. We're going to have wind-blown seeds. We're going to have seeds moved in, carried in by birds and mammals. And so species composition is going to be moving in from surrounding areas. In this slide, we're kind of taking a look at two things. One is that early succession. You can tell that there's a couple rows of trees, one on the left side of the picture, and you can kind of see the top of that next row in the background. So there were a couple of, the resource manager in this case was speeding up succession and also controlling species composition by planting some trees, species that were desirable to achieve that person's goal. At the same time, then we have some early successional species kind of creeping in between those rows. Probably for a time they maintained, mowed that area in between those trees as they got started, but now we have some succession, early succession happening in between those trees. So we kind of have a combination of both. It's a good example of that early succession, some shrubs, woody plants, both shrubs and trees moving in between those planted rows. So, kind of back before I get too far away from that last slide, we can utilize direct seeding and planting as a way to modify succession, right? By speeding the process up. Now we move into kind of the next, in the mid-succession. And those intolerant tree species, those pioneer species, the ones that require full sun to grow, continue to really take off. And the battle in the forest is for sunlight. And so as they get taller, their crowns get bigger, which is the crown of the tree, of course, then includes the branches and the leaves. Those crowns grow together. We call that the canopy, forest canopy. And when it closes, that just means that those crowns are touching each other. And so we have a much shadier environment, microclimate, if you will, in the understory, the lower portion of that forest now. And so it makes a note there on this slide that tolerant species may begin to outcompete intolerant. Those tolerant species are the ones that can grow very well in shade. Let's take a look at that at the next slide and kind of see that process, proceeding. So we have the hardwoods. If you ignore those conifers in the background of this picture, the hardwoods, this looks kind of like very much of a mess. And if this was your garden, you had a lot of plants out there, you probably would call some of those trees we're looking at weeds. So and they might well be. In terms of meeting your goal as a landowner. So this forest stand of trees, anyway, would probably be a good candidate for some type of timber stand improvement, or TSI, that would include thinning. And probably in this case, we'd want to do some thinning in terms of removing undesirable species, those that, again, aren't going to meet our goal as either timber production, wildlife management, whatever that goal might be, and those trees that are more poorly formed than their neighbors. So we're going to begin selecting trees that really we can think of as our crop in that stand of timber. Which ones are going to be helping us achieve our goal? Let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about this idea, a concept of tolerance a little bit more. It's kind of important in terms of understanding succession and how we're going to manage that succession. And so there's lots of different tolerances. If you looked at a growth requirement, some silvicultural information about how well trees grow and what kind of things influence that growth, especially in urban areas, you might see a tree's tolerance to salt, tolerance to wind, if it's discussing windbreak species, tolerance to compaction, tolerance to flooding. But when in forest management and forestry, when you see the term tolerance or tolerant or intolerant, they're referring to shade and sun. So a tree species, again, that is tolerant means that it can grow well in shade. It's tolerant of shade. A tree species that's intolerant needs to have full sun to grow well. It might survive in partial sun for a while, but and then in between those two extremes, there are some that are have varying levels of intolerance. So, for example, oaks really have an intolerance level that's kind of in the middle there, compared to like tulip poplar or willow or aspen or something like that that needs to have full sun to grow in, or it's going to get shaded out and die. A tree species that is very common in Illinois, sugar maple, is very tolerant. It can grow in deep shade. So as that canopy closes, right, that tree species, sugar maple, is going to be able to continue to grow even though it's in the deep shade. This picture kind of shows a stand of white oak, a lot of white oak here, that the canopy definitely is closed. All those trees are so close together. The crowns are touching, very deep shade in the understory. And I want you to kind of look at in the understory for small trees. You know, do we have any reproduction-sized trees? And you hear someone talking about a reproduction-sized tree. It's a tree that's less than an inch in diameter. So it's those little seedlings out there. And really, there's not much in, at least from this picture right here. There might be a couple in the next size category, which is a sapling. Saplings are 1 to 3 inches. There might be a couple there, but not many. Then the next size, in terms of tree growth, is pole timber size, and that's in that 3 to 10 inch category. And there are some pole timber sized trees in this picture, and then saw timber sized trees are 10 inches in diameter or larger. Some people will refer to saw timber sized trees over 12 inches in diameter, but here recently a lot of foresters are now refer to a saw timber sized tree as something that's 10 inches in diameter and larger, especially in the eastern. As we get close in over to Pennsylvania and Ohio, definitely are referred to saw timber as 10 inches in diameter or larger. So lots of those right here. An oak tree down in the understory is not going to have a chance. It might germinate, acorn might germinate, but it's just not enough sunlight to take off, and it will die. However, sugar maple, and there are a couple little sugar maple in the understory here, they're going to do well, and we'll talk about what's going to happen in this slide. We have those tolerant species, sugar maple, and intolerance, then like the oak and hickory, that are beginning to share that canopy. Right? The tolerant species are going to continue to hang in there in the understory. Intolerants are not. So as the intolerant species, like the oak and hickory, die, either from natural mortality or, I'm going to sell a few oak trees. We selectively remove a tree here and a tree there. But even without intervention, as those oaks die out, they're not going to have any young oak trees to be replacing them. They're going to be replaced by a tolerant species. And an example we've been using, the sugar maple, it will be that forest will, at the final stage of succession or climax stage, will be a sugar maple forest. Now, is that bad, good? It depends on your goals, right? So it all is going to depend on your goal. We look at this stand of timber, and there has been some natural mortality in this particular stand. There's been a little bit of selection harvesting that's gone on with just a few trees removed, but a lot of most of the smaller trees in this stand, you see a little bit better mix, of solid timber-sized trees, some bigger trees in the background there. A couple of these trees in the foreground are also over 10 inches. You see some pole timber, sapling, and a few reproduction, not a lot. We don't have a lot of young, new, actively growing seedling-sized trees in this stand. So, it is a stand of timber that the growth rate is probably being suppressed a little bit. Thinning would encourage the more rapid growth of the remaining trees. So, in this particular stand of timber, as an example, before we move on to the next slide, if we wanted oak regeneration in this as a landowner, then we're going to do what you might hear termed group selection harvest. A group selection is really just a small area that's clear cut. So you're removing trees, and sometimes group selection harvests are done at a 1 acre scale, or sometimes they're done at a 2 acre scale. If your woodland is small, less than 10 acres, then that size can be reduced a little bit. But the trees, in order to get oaks, remember, to grow there, we're going to need some sunlight. So we've got to make a big enough clearing for the oaks to take off. And we might leave a large tree that, if we wanted to reseed that area with white oak and black oak as an example, we had a couple good trees out there that were producing acorns, so we could leave that tree, remove all the trees around it, the group selection harvest, or even you might refer to it as a clear cut. If we leave a seed tree there, then that's something that's called a seed tree harvest. We're leaving a tree there to provide seed, and we're going to come back and remove those trees we've left for seed and let all the little trees kind of take off. At any rate, we could do some group selection in this particular stand. We could also just do some thinning and allow this stand to continue to move towards that climax stage, and eventually it would become a sugar maple stand, and maybe that wouldn't necessarily interfere with your goals. But remember that when we're managing a stand of timber, we are managing succession to accomplish those goals. So, and so, that your question then, it becomes, what are your goals for owning that land? And a lot of times, that's going to be the first thing that a forester, either from the Department of Natural Resources here in Illinois, or a person you're going to hire, is going to ask you, what kind of goals? What do you want to do out there on your forested acreage? Before we can write your plan, just keep in mind that about a little over 80%, 82% of Illinois forests are owned by private individuals. So a lot of people think most of our forests are owned by the state or federal government, aren't they? And even nationally, the majority of our forest land is owned by private individuals. And the complication for that is that, should we have, in terms of forest health, a good forest management plan is not only going to help achieve your goals, but it's also going to maintain forest health. And as late as 2006, I'm not sure what the current data is, couldn't get my hands on that, but in 2006, less than 10% of forest landowners had written forest management plans, less than 10% of those 82% of our forest land being owned privately. So, there is some risk to talk about forest health and invasive species and producing timber for residents in the United States. The United States is still a net importer of wood. We import more than we export. So just kind of something to think about. Demand for wood is projected to increase by 25% in the next 10 years. So this recession probably has slowed that demand down a little bit, but certainly if the majority of our land in the United States is owned privately, where is all that timber going to come from, all that lumber, especially if we can't increase the amount we're going to import? So let's talk more about your management plan. What is in a management plan? Your goals, both short and long term. You need an inventory of the forest resource, and then based on those two things, then management recommendations are going to be designed to help you accomplish your goals. There's going to be a schedule of when to do them and what you need to do. These are just some examples of goals that you might have. Most of our forest landowners in Illinois, when surveyed, do not have timber production as a goal, as at least a primary goal. Own that forest land to maintain the beauty, aesthetics. They want to be good land stewards. They're concerned about forest health and wildlife. And recreation's in there as well. So when you talk about timber management, do I really want to include timber management? I guess the other question is, I get from time to time, I want to do more than one thing. Can I do that? And certainly can. And have multiple goals. Sometimes our goals, if we have for managing for wildlife, specific species of wildlife, maybe we're trying to manage two major species that have much different habitat needs. Then we may have to compromise what we're doing out in the forest to maximize habitat for those particular animals. But we certainly can have more than one goal or objective or one goal in our forest land resource. We'll begin to take the next step then. We've decided what we want to do with our forest. Now we need to really figure out what we have. And that can be a little bit of a challenge. As I mentioned to you, we oftentimes don't have the ability to go out and do that inventory ourselves. So we are going to need to find out what kind of soils we have present. What is their production capacity, capability? What do we have in terms of just the amount of trees, the volume of wood, board foot volume per acre? What do I have? What kind of commodity do I have at this point in time if I was going to sell it? What kind of value is my forest currently? We're also going to need to evaluate the wildlife habitat, especially if we have wildlife management as a goal, and that's going to depend on the species that you're interested in enhancing that forest habitat. And so this might be a point where you would involve an Illinois Department of Natural Resources wildlife biologist. And then in addition, you need to identify areas that might be unique on your property, areas that you might want to stay away from if you had a timber harvest, if there's a wetland, a spring, some place that might be impacted with skid trails and that type of thing, or historical or culturally important areas on your farm. You want to make sure that you included that, not just a listing, but you are going to begin developing some maps, or the people you're hiring are going to be developing some maps. So inventorying help. You can get a couple places that we can get some help from. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Foresters are one resource for us in terms of inventorying. They cannot mark timber for sale, but they can help with our inventory. There are fewer of those people than there used to be. And I think there were just 3 more that retired in December. So we may have to turn to hiring a private consulting forester, private forest contractor for the timber cruising, the measurement and inventory. And then our soil and water conservation districts and our counties can help us with collecting that information regarding soils and to help us with that final stage of the inventory. Okay. I'm going to see if we can take a look at share my screen, computer screen. We'll take a look at where can you get help here. See if we can do this. Okay. So we can get help from the University of Illinois Extension website, the Illinois Forestry website. Go to Illinois Forestry, enter that website, and under Forest Management, the top tab, we want to find some professional assistance. And within that, you see state agencies. All you need to do is click on Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and it's going to give us access to the district forester's offices and map as of February 2012. So there's a map of all those district foresters you can take a look at. Consulting foresters, we want to hire someone. Jay Hayek is our extension forester at the University of Illinois. He's put together a nice publication recently on why should you hire a professional forester, the services that those folks offer, as well as if you got into tree planting, as well as inventorying. If you don't know what, I got some questions about cost basis. We'll talk about that in a minute, and taxation. There's a timber tax website, so real good resources, and forestry contractors as well. So, okay. All right, so those are some resources on our University of Illinois Extension forestry website that I would encourage you to go there to find out who to contact to get some help. Okay, so your management plan then is going to come together by that forester, whether he's been hired, whether it's you've gotten IDNR forester. Just remember, Illinois Department of Natural Resource Forester, they're all covering about 8 to 10 counties. It may take a little bit of time. It may take a year to get that person to your farm. But he's going to consider your goals, take a look at the resource after his inventory, and then make some management recommendations, probably in those by each stand of timber. Unless your forest is small and is relatively uniform in species composition, topography, you're likely to have your forest parceled out into stands of timber, and those management recommendations, such as these, listed for each of those stands of timber. Now, these are some examples of TSI, or timber stand improvements, that we might use, just a few of them. Prescribed burning, we're using burning now in deciduous forest to control species composition. Fend bark trees like maple don't survive a real quick fire that's going through the understory. Are using it to manage invasive species, like experimentally with garlic mustard and other species. But prescribed burning had been only used in conifer production down in a lot down in the southeastern part of the United States, and to get rid of hardwood trees. But it's used more and more often. thinning that might include not just cutting down the tree, but injecting that tree with herbicide, and that's what he's using a hatchet called a hypo hatchet. So he's injecting herbicide in that tree. So when we leave the tree there, we don't have to, if it's not merchantable, it's a lot faster to do some thinning. And it's providing habitat then for insects, woodpeckers, and when it hits the ground, then it's going to provide some more habitat for all those amphibians and additional insects that are around. Okay, and you'll notice on the left here, harvesting is a timber stand improvement. Well, I state that harvesting is not what they want to do. So why should I sell timber? It may be listed in your management plan as a mechanism to improve forest health. The trees, after a thinning, the residual stand of the trees still left behind are going to have more rapid growth, so it's going to increase the vigor of that stand of timber. Well, we might need to harvest timber to improve the wildlife habitat. For example, deer, in all those pictures of those stands of timber, with the exception of one, didn't have much new reproductive sized trees growing. In the wintertime, deer utilize a lot of woody material for browse, winter browse, especially if we have a lot of snow. So a clear cut or one of those small group selection harvested areas is going to provide excellent winter habitat for white-tailed deer. So we may intentionally harvest to do that. We want to change the species composition, or maybe we're trying to develop some trails, horse trails, or hiking trails, or ATV trails. Some type of recreational area on our property is another reason for harvesting timber. And then, of course, it's going to provide some income. That's another reason that people harvest timber, obviously, as a sustained yield over time. They're getting get their woodland into a rotation where they're harvesting trees every 25 years, getting income to supplement their farm operation. They've got children using it as an investment, children going into college, so they're harvesting timber to do that. Or occasionally we can use that forest resource as an emergency fund. That may be the reason some people harvest timber. We may have something called a salvage harvest when we have some kind of windstorm or other climatic catastrophe, ice storm like we had down in southern Illinois a couple of years ago. Go in and salvage what we can. It's going to improve the stand that's left, getting rid of those trees, and going to get it move through succession a little bit faster by going in and salvaging. Sanitation harvest, or something we do when there's a disease or insect mortality, and then we might just be trying to change the land use of that area. So we're ready to sell. We decided we do need to make a harvest, use it to manage our forest, meet our objectives. What do we have for sale? If you look out there in this picture, what do we have for sale? I think, well, I've got some pretty big trees out there. I kind of recognize maybe a couple of white oaks. I'm just not real sure what I've got for sale. So, but the first more important question is, oh yeah, what are my objectives for this stand? What was I going to do out here? Is it wildlife production? Is it forest health? So that's going to help me begin to decide what I have for sale, and then our harvest then can be done to meet those objectives, to meet our management plan. So anytime we're harvesting, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a proactive, productive way. And we're getting out there. Those trees should be marked, either by a professional forester, following your goals and instructions, or you can get out there with that professional forester. And there might be some trees that are important to you to remain, even though they have some economic value. There might be a tree that you are familiar with with that tree. You used to sit under it as a child, with your grandfather. It's historical or culturally important to you, so you want to mark that tree that not to harvest. So those trees then are marked for sale, and then they're measured. When we measure the tree, most forest trees are sold as they stand in the forest. So we have to measure the diameter of that tree, and then we have to estimate the merchantable height. And that's what these folks in this picture are doing. They're estimating the merchantable height of that tree, how many 16-foot logs are in there. We use those two numbers then to determine an estimate of the board foot volume. And that estimate of board foot volume then comes from what's called a volume table that uses a couple different scales. There you might see a volume table and you start and look at another one and think, well, a 12-inch tree on this one over here with three 16-foot logs has less volume than this other. What's going on? So just keep in mind that we've got three main scales, volume scales that are used: Doyle, International Quarter-Inch Rule, and Scribner. And Scribner is not used very much in Illinois. And the Quarter-Inch International Rule, even though it is most consistent, both large and small trees, it is not frequently used. The Doyle scale is, however. That's the way timber buyers would like to, most commonly will buy trees, bid on a stand of timber using that Doyle scale, because it underestimates the volume a little bit, and because the timber buyer is accepting the risk for a harvest. So some of those trees that are standing there, can't tell from the ground, that may have a lot of heart rot, and not going to know until he gets it on the ground. So if you look at our timber sale reports for Illinois, there is a report, how much is white oak or black oak, or et cetera, is selling for. There is a commodity report for trees, basically, and you can get to that on our U of I Extension Forestry website that we just took a look at a second ago. But you do need to agree. Just realize that most of our timber is sold using the Doyle scale. So that timber buyer is accepting the potential loss. There's a couple ways you can harvest it. You look at that timber sale report, you're going to see that you get more money per volume by delivering that log to the mill. So while you may be tempted to harvest your own timber and haul it to the mill, just keep in mind that unless you've got the special equipment and you are skilled and have been trained in cutting and hauling those trees out of the woods, it can be very, very dangerous. So probably a much better way is to sell the trees as they stand. You're not going to get as much as you would delivered to the mill, but just remember that all that you've got to account for your labor. Unless you've got a couple of small, like you're just removing a few trees, you can also, if you were going to remove some of those trees yourself and then sell them in the specialty market, you're going to go ahead and mill those up yourself. So that would be another option. But stumpage sales, or stumpage just means that those trees are standing out in the forest. Then there's two ways you can do a stumpage sale. One is to arrange for the payment to all come at once, one lump sum. It's much easier to administer. And remember that you're going to have your sale is best administered by a professional, not yourself, unless you've had some experience or you're in direct consultation with someone. But again, we'll talk about that in just a second. But this is the other option. You can sell the trees by unit or scale, and that's what these guys are doing right here. They're scaling. When they're scaling a log, they're measuring it on the ground, so they can check for defects in terms of heart rot and that type of thing. So, and they're measuring them and determining the value per unit. Trees are board foot volume is reported and sold per 1,000 board foot. So when you see white oak as an example is going for $400 per 1,000 board feet. So it's 40 cents a board foot in that case, that example. All right. So then we're, how do I determine what the price is and who's going to buy it? Down at the bottom, written sealed bid. That's going to be the best, give it your safest and best results for private woodland owners. Oral bids and negotiations might be done by a forester on your behalf. But you don't want to do that, and especially don't want to sell your timber to someone just stopping by and saying, hey, I'll give you X number of dollars for that, unless you've got a very small amount to sell. But even then, I think that you are much better off consulting a forester, getting their advice, and going with a sealed bid. This just shows you what a forester, in this case, it's going to have to be a private consulting forester you hire. Remember I said earlier that IDNR foresters cannot help you mark timber or conduct a timber sale. So you would hire a consulting forester. They charge per hour or a lump fee or as a percentage of the sale. So you need to ask them, how do they charge? What's their fee? But this is what they're going to include. They're going to send this out to timber buyers. A timber buyer then is going to come to your property, take a look at it, maybe do his own inventory, just kind of double checking, but he's going to have a list of certain volume, 10,000 board feet of basswood, 20,000 board feet of white oak, whatever, but going to be listed in that bid. Sometimes it's not that detailed, but most of the time it is. Going to enter into a written contract with the buyer, and then you want to keep tabs on it during the harvest. You can see this logging deck here looks pretty bad right now. So in your contract, you're going to should require that harvester to rejuvenate the site, seed that down with grasses and forbs after the harvest, skid road, any kind of roads they create. You may keep them out of that area during certain times of the year when the ground is soft. In the spring, require the harvest to occur when the ground is frozen. So all those things you need to outlined in your bid, and then are written in that contract. That again, the professional forester is going to help you go through that process. And here's why. Besides getting more money, you're going to end up cutting fewer trees. Well, yeah, because they're going to be marked. Sometimes, unfortunately, trees are cut just to get out of the way, and by harvesting or buyers that are not as reputable. So it would be a good idea to ask for references of those as people are bidding on your harvest as well. And then number 3 there, it says more residual volume and value. So you might hear the term high grading. High grading is when someone comes in, the trees aren't marked. You say, all right, I've got 10 acres of forest, for sale. They come in and remove all the best trees and leave you with the junk. And so that doesn't help you achieve your goal of getting another harvest 20, 30 years down the road, if that's your goal. Now you've got all the deformed trees. So that's why hiring a professional forester, you're going to have better trees left, more value per acre left, and going to help you achieve the next long-term goal in your woodland, especially with timber, in terms of timber production, but also for general forest health and wildlife management as well. You don't want all those nice acorn-producing trees or other woody mass-producing trees to be removed if you're trying to manage for deer and turkey out in your woodland. Let's talk for just a second about, what are some other options out there for income. I'm not getting a timber harvest as frequently as I need money. So some people look to firewood production. Some people are using their forest resource now to heat their home, beginning to wood-burning furnaces are their efficiency has been dramatically improved in all different kinds that folks are now, if they've got a woodland, utilizing firewood production for home use. That's an income alternative as well. We just have to keep in mind that in terms of firewood production, the emerald ash borer, and I learned yesterday visiting with the Elizabeth Burns from USDA APHIS that they're likely heading for some change. They had a meeting yesterday, and so the quarantine zone may change once again, but there are some firewood movement requirements or restrictions, rather, that you need to check into that, and they have to be inspected if you're looking at doing commercial firewood production. Some other options are value-added kind of production. We talked about value-added corn, soybeans, any other commodity. We can do the same thing with timber. A lot of wood carvers that look for unique species that are not available in some locations. Basswood is not a great tree to as an example, not a tree that it's not good for firewood. It doesn't produce as many BTUs as oak or some other species, but it's great for carving. So this is another way that folks might utilize some tree species that there's not a strong market for outside what you might call a specialty market. You're carving, musical instrument construction, and you think, well, I don't have anybody here in my county, my part of the state that makes violins. But I can tell you that remember that we are living in this global economy. So I know several folks from Illinois that have utilized the purchase of a dry kiln and the internet to sell their timber across the world. And so just another, it takes a little more labor, a little more investment, but that's certainly another option for you. Ginseng used to hear a lot about ginseng production. There's some good research and information out from West Virginia Extension and also Virginia, that if you're interested in exploring the possibility of growing ginseng in your cultivated ginseng in beds within your forest, one of the concerns with ginseng production is illegal illegal trespass and theft of ginseng once the local folks that aren't quite as honest as they should be find out that you've got that out in the woodland. So that's just a consideration. A lot of people have a ginseng production area up close to their residence. Probably something that would be difficult to do in an area that you're not living there or don't have some kind of security on that remote forested tract. Shiitake mushrooms, the Vermilion County Conservation District is a good resource here in Illinois. I've done a lot of applied research with shiitake mushroom production, and they have been doing a workshop, I think, just about annually on how to grow shiitakes. And again, it's a niche market that find that buyer first before you start getting into production, but they're fairly easy to grow. Morels, taking advantage of what's growing out in the forest. Fruits, nuts, there are some markets, again, that pecans that are not grown. They're more native pecans, have a little bit thicker husk than the ones that are grown commercially. But there are some people that are demanding that kind of fruit. So again, specialty markets. And the maple syrup production, certainly a big investment in terms of equipment, but it's another alternative. Something that people are getting, have recently, say 5-10 years, gotten into is fee hunting on their property. Just remember to use an attorney and contact and consult with your insurance agent when you're developing a hunting lease. I've heard lots of bad stories about people, I didn't know I needed to tell them that they couldn't camp on my property, or they couldn't have fires, or they tore up my fences, or on and on. So you need to make sure you outline what they can do, what they can't do, but it's an option. There's been some people that have kind of taken it from to the next step of providing a lodging, kind of a full-service bee hunting experience on their property, much like agritourism is going on out in Washington State. Agritourism in the forest, they're real good extension staff involvement out there. They've had a specialist. He may have retired this last year, but some publications about what they basically have done is developed a timeshare in the forest where you can go out to a forest during a certain time. You schedule a time to go out. They may have camping facilities. They may have a lodge where you're going to go out and do some bird watching, hiking, a whole variety of. It kind of depends on what that particular operator is offering out in Washington State. In the understory, there's a lot of broadleaf evergreen things like holly. So at Christmas time, a lot of the operators will have sleigh rides. People come out, and then they make a Christmas wreath out of those materials that are just growing in the forest. So just something to think about. Maybe a way to kind of tie those two things together. There's not a lot of that going on in Illinois right now, but there are a couple of kind of bed and breakfasts that have expanded into that offered that recreation experience that going out in the country. In the local foods area, a lot of the community sport agriculture businesses have a similar type of arrangement, getting people, as a member, a CSA member, out to the farm. And so in this case, we're doing it out, getting those folks out in the forest. So just something to consider. In terms of cost share programs, the one that's available currently, not a lot of options, as many options as in the past, but U.S. Department of Agriculture's NRCS program, their EQIP program, does have funding available, cost share funding, and you're looking at that slide going, I don't have an approved forest management plan. Well, the first thing that EQIP will pay for is you to hire someone to write a plan. So it's based on, that cost share is based on acreage you own. If you own less than 31 acres, as an example, there's a cost share at about $400. So I encourage you to go and utilize your local NRCS office that's in combination with the Soil and Water District office in your county to find out about EQIP. Just a word about taxes. The main thing that you need to do, two things. One, consult an accountant. They're either considered a business or a tax or an investment. There is a forest taxation link on that publication we looked at on the web there, on the Consulting Foresters. You go through that and we'll say forest taxes. And then secondly, besides utilizing an accountant, if you have not determined the value of the timber on your land, the trees on your land, that's referred to as the basis. You need to do that as soon as you can, because when you get ready to sell your timber, then if you have no basis to start from, then you pay a tax on the entire amount of the harvest. So this way you can use your basis. I started here, and this is what I actually produced. So it's a way of reducing your tax debt or liability. And finally, some additional resources. We talked about and kind of took a look at that Illinois Department of Natural Resources, foresters, the private consulting foresters and contractors. We got to that DNR website through the second one listed there, the University of Illinois Extension Forestry website. And then the last one there listed, Forest Best Management Practices, is, you can see that it is from SIU. A really good publication. Again, just so you understand, you're a better, more informed land manager about those management practices, even if you're going to hire someone else to do it. With that, that's all I have. Take a few questions if there are any at this time, and you could think of something as you begin to actually get out and develop a management plan, or trying to find somebody and run into a roadblock. You've got my email there and phone number. I'd be glad to visit with you and get you connected to the right person. So.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
Is CRP a cost share program?
Pardon?
CRP, is that a cost share program? Conservation?
Yeah, it would be for tree planting, sure. Yep, Conservation Reserve Program would be something that if you're wanting to reforest an area, or if there had never been, there's reforestation for replacing a forest, and there's something called afforestation. So if you look at a map of Illinois, comparing the forest that we had back in the 1800s to in the 80s, I think that map was done, you have these yellow locations, and they're places we never had a forest. It was a prairie historically. That's called afforestation, because you're establishing a forest where there wasn't one. That's the difference between afforestation and reforestation. But that would be another option, right, James? CRP program.
Thank you.
I've got a question. With this emerald ash borer quarantine now, as a private landowner, are they going to still be able to move their timber?
Yeah, so with during a timber harvest, right now, and again, as I mentioned a second ago, there likely will be some changes after April 1st. The advisory committee, state and federal folks met yesterday to discuss this whole issue. But currently, there is a time period when, if you're going to harvest ash trees out of the woodland, then there's a flight time, and the flight time for Illinois, at least currently, ended on March 1st. So I still want to cut down some ash trees on my property. So what you have to do then is those logs have to be covered when they're transported. So you would work with it would be best if you're doing a timber harvest again to work with a forester, a consulting forester, to find out about the transportation requirement. But it just has to be covered as you're moving it from one place to another, if it's during that time period when the beetles could be moving. The discussion yesterday was that there potentially is looking at removing some of the restrictions. The internal zone, and then it'll be up to states. The map that Elizabeth had yesterday that we were looking at didn't have that, really had all the states that have emerald ash borer in it now, Illinois, all over to Pennsylvania, West Virginia. You could transport even within that zone. That's what might happen. So I guess my answer is to check on that Illinois EAB website, because my answer today is going to be wrong after April 1st.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess related to emerald ash borer, I think they're cutting back. Not going to do be much less testing or trapping this year. Generally, I think their term is like generally accepted that they're everywhere. Kind of, I can't remember the terminology that was referred to yesterday, but so it'll be interesting to see what in the next month and a half what happens with the new requirements, if any.
Hey, Dave?
Yeah.
With the climate change that is happening, is that also impacting the succession in forest communities as well?
It would. You know, the general thought is that over time that it would allow the movement of trees, you know, ecological movement, slowly move them northward. It would also change if we had conditions where it got warmer over time. Some trees that are from the northern climate that are stuck down into a warmer zone and kind of barely surviving, like the eastern white pine. That's why eastern white pine is just really native to a couple counties in Illinois. It grows down there okay, but you know, in terms of ecological normal distribution, then it would likely not do as well in northern Illinois anymore, and might get, you know, its vigor might decline and not be able to survive in this warmer climate. So one of the things that is changing, you know, is if you look at it, look at the information and what's happening out in the Rockies and related to mountain pine beetle. Mountain pine beetle is an insect that is kind of like emerald ash borer. It eats the phloem, and so what it's done is it's been able to overwinter at higher and higher altitudes. So the bristlecone pine, which is in that higher altitudes, the seeds from those pine cones are a really important food source for grizzly bears. And so bristlecone pine, if you look at, you know, just Google that, and I mean the whole mountainsides are just dead. It's kind of like what gypsy moths have done to defoliation out in the eastern part of the United States. But at any rate, then the grizzlies' food source is gone, so then it causes them to look elsewhere for food. And so they're thinking some of those attacks last year out of Yosemite were related to attacks on humans in the campgrounds, were from sows that were about 100 pounds underweight in the spring. And so it's kind of interesting to things that are definitely a demonstration of how things are connected. So
I have one more question.
Yes.
For silver maples, other than the ornamental use around homes, is there anything else we can put them to use for? Is there anything else we can put them?
Silver maple, you said, Jim?
Yes.
Yeah, silver maple. If you're silver maple actually is in value where it's close enough to a paper mill market. They're using it as a soft, you know, it's kind of as a softwood, and so it actually, again, it depends on your distance from a mill. But in southern Illinois, it's been used. It's found kind of a new market down there. I don't know up northern Illinois whether it's close enough to paper mills in the southern part of Wisconsin increased value, but you know, silver maple from a arboriculture standpoint is a better tree is probably a hybrid between the silver and red maple, which is most people call it crimson maple. It will hybridize on their own, but it's more wind. It's a little more long-lived. The crimson maple is like a red maple, and it's a little more resistant to wind and ice damage. But
Okay.
any other questions?
Yeah, Dave, quick question. You mentioned on firewood, does that restrictions apply to small acreages?
Yeah. So the firewood, if you're gonna sell firewood and go across out of a quarantine zone, if you're producing firewood for your own property, your own use, not a big deal. But if you start moving firewood in and out of like in Illinois right now, we still have that internal quarantine zone. So if I was going to try to take firewood from Champaign down to St. Louis, then I'm going to go out of that quarantine zone to have that firewood inspected. So if I'm going to go into the commercial business, then you've got to just simply have your operation registered. Then you have to either heat treat it or put it in a dry kiln and dry it, or fumigate it.
Wow.
Then you're going to get a USDA stamp. You're inspected, and if you look at any of those bundles of firewood, like at the convenience stores, you'll see a USDA shield. It's best to on the Illinois Emerald Ash Borer, Illinois EAB website. It's got those firewood requirements as a seller, all outlined there, as it at least currently stands. Like I said.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, you're welcome. Okay. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon, and if you have any more, feel free to drop me an email. Have a good afternoon.